My name is Grace Peng, and on behalf of the Interagency Modeling and Analysis, I'd like to welcome you to the pre-meeting webinar for the Integrating Machine Learning with Multiscale Modeling workshop series. And we are delighted to have the folks from NVIDIA here with us. And our first speaker will be Jesse Tatro, who is a solutions architect working in healthcare at NVIDIA, helping researchers accelerate deep learning and high-performance computing workflows related to medical imaging. And please welcome Jesse.
Thanks, Grace. So like Grace said, my name is Jesse Tatro. I've been at NVIDIA for 2 years working as a solution architect in healthcare, and I'd like to give a presentation today on accelerated computing with NVIDIA GPUs. So a little background about NVIDIA. NVIDIA is known for their GPUs, their graphics processing units, and a lot of people have heard of them from computer graphics and the gaming industry, which is certainly where we got our start back in 1993. But since then, we really have become a platform and systems company where we accelerate both the hardware and software needed for computer graphics, GPU computing or high performance computing, regular kind of scientific codes. And then also since 2012 or 2013, when the artificial intelligence revolution started happening, we got into that and are accelerating neural networks on a number of software layers. So just a quick note about the hardware. So the GPU is a complementary piece of hardware to the traditional CPU, central processing unit. And a CPU is a latency-bound architecture that has to do a lot of things, like run the operating system, run desktop applications. It has to be fairly good at almost everything and very robust. And it's latency-bound, meaning the time between a click and when you get your response is what most of the architecture is optimized for, not necessarily crunching as many numbers per second as possible. It must be robust. The GPU, on the other hand, is a general purpose acceleration architecture. And so it has many more cores than a CPU, and all of the cores are much more specialized to accelerate particular computations. And the CPU and GPU work together in a heterogeneous architecture to run heterogeneous software applications, where the parts that are appropriate for running on a CPU run there, and the pieces of code that can be accelerated and run faster in a throughput-bound manner are ported to the GPU. So how does that work, right? Maybe you're writing a scientific application and there is one line of code that takes hours to run. Right, that is the typical thing we see when analyzing software. Well, we want to identify calls and APIs that and functions that have inherent parallelism in them that can be more appropriately mapped to GPU. And that might only be 5% of a scientific code, although it might contribute to over 95% of the runtime. And the rest of the sequential code, not the parallel code, the sequential code would always run in the CPU. So when approaching, accelerating any type of scientific application, this is typically how you view the problem from a high level of identifying what pieces of your code and what functions are applicable for GPU acceleration, and then porting those pieces to the GPU, and then still having the overall application end-to-end leverage both architectures for the highest performance. So how do you get started computing with GPUs, right? There are so many different types of scientific applications within structural biology, obviously all kinds of modeling, molecular dynamics, deep learning, all these things. The first thing to do, and the easiest way to access this accelerated computing, is through pre-built applications from NVIDIA. We have a GPU accelerated application catalog where we have end-to-end accelerated over 600 individual applications. So there's a good chance, if you're using commercial software or even open source software, that we've already accelerated and identified the pieces of code that can run on a GPU and done that rewrite for you. If that's not available, the second way to approach GPU computing is leverage some of our libraries, which I'll highlight in a minute. that are the fundamental packages that accelerate different lower level operations, such as matrix algebra or neural network computation, or like I said, molecular dynamics. These types of parallel computations, we've written libraries to assist, and so you can use those libraries in order to integrate into your overall application. If neither of those suit your need for a particular application, we also have developed CUDA, which is our programming language that we have made for accessing a GPU and running software on the GPU. And so you can even write your own functions with our CUDA programming language, and you can do that in our CUDA C++ API or through various Python libraries. And so there are many ways to approach accelerating your application. This is kind of going down from application to library to the actual CUDA programming language, different levels of abstraction which require more and more investigation of the code. But almost any application could be ported to a GPU. It's just a matter of identifying which pieces of it would be more suitable to run on that architecture. GPUs are prevalent across the world in many different supercomputers. We power 22 of the top 25 greenest computers, meaning that they are ranked based on how much computation they can do per watt. Oak Ridge National Lab has Summit, which has 27,000 of our latest GPUs, and there are tons of these systems on the top 500 list that all are accelerated with GPUs for different application workloads. So when you're trying to look at the value of a GPU and the acceleration of your code, there's kind of two different ways that you can look at it. In some cases, you can improve the accuracy of your algorithm, right? Maybe that means that you can do a larger problem size. Maybe that means you can leverage double precision floating point arithmetic to get more precise calculations because you have the hardware available. Or maybe you can just run more scientific experiments in the same amount of time in order to find a better set of parameters for your model or something like that. The other way to look at it is, even if you're getting the same accuracy that you would on your serial code, we can accelerate the time to solution. So like I said, just iterating on experiments faster, right? There are some applications which I'll share and some listed here where, what would it mean if you have a molecular dynamics code and you could run it 300,000 times faster on a GPU than a CPU? Obviously, the outcome is you can run incredibly more experiments in the same amount of time. And so it's speeding the time to a solution. Some of our latest innovations, not just regular GPU cores, but a different piece of silicon called Tensor cores, are particularly applicable across many different areas of science. And we call this mixed precision computing, where you're using floating point 16-bit as well as 32-bit and 64-bit, sometimes 8-bit computations in parallel simultaneously to be able to do faster computing. There are plenty of applications. Some cool ones that I think might be applicable to the MSM group are the mixed precision weather modeling, where they're just simulating a system that large scale, being able to classify what things and what values do I have to keep track of at 16-bit precision, and which ones do I have to keep track of at 64-bit precision, and being able to have a unified architecture like a GPU to be able to use all those simultaneously can accelerate the workflow quite a bit. So what libraries are actually out there to use? Well, we cover a range of different industry verticals: computational fluid dynamics, computational physics and chemistry. Within life science and bioinformatics, which will probably be most applicable to this group, like I continue to say, cryo-electron microscopy, structural biology, molecular dynamics, image reconstruction, microscopy deconvolution. All of these rely on fundamental, usually matrix-type operations in order to be accelerated, and we have a bunch of different applications that can benefit from this. Weather and climate modeling is another large-scale simulation that we can accelerate. and regular numerical analytics, and geoscience and seismology is also areas that all of these applications map down to the same fundamental operations. These just regular linear algebra, signal processing, visualization, they all share so many different operations that's where we plug in our libraries so that researchers can build software on top of it, and it will all map down to the same CUDA architecture. We also accelerate deep learning, which is the field of AI that is pushing us forward right now, both deep learning training and deep learning inference. So when you're training a model, that's when you actually have your data set, you're feeding a neural network, and you're continually updating its parameters over time to improve accuracy. This is incredibly benefited by GPUs because all of the neurons in a single layer of a neural network can be computed simultaneously. This leads to a lot of inherent parallelism in that code, and therefore the 5,000 cores on our GPU can each take a piece of that data and run it simultaneously, immensely speeding up training a neural network. On the other side, once you have a neural network in an acceptable accuracy, then you actually want to deploy it for inference, right? You're not updating the parameters anymore, but you're actually going to deploy it. And so for that, we have software libraries like Tensor RT to be able to take a neural network and shrink it down, combining redundant layers, all kinds of magic under the hood to make sure that when you deploy your model, it actually can run in closer to real time for many applications. And, all throughout this talk, I've kind of been talking about the more scientific high-performance computing algorithms, and then also the other side of it is artificial intelligence. But, even in the last couple years, really, we've seen these merge in, the exascale weather modeling problem. We have an enormous simulation, but then more and more people are able to leverage the same GPU architecture to build codes that actually use a neural network in that simulation to be able to estimate values or, do some of the compute and the computation per time step. And so this is a really exciting and emerging, field here where we can combine these two specialties and they all run on the same architecture. And lastly, I'll just say as the introduction to NVIDIA, everything that I have said about the libraries and the applications that we accelerate, we host on what we call NVIDIA GPU Cloud, or NGC. It is not a physical cloud like Amazon or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud. It's more of a software hub where we have containerized and compiled all of these scientific applications for you. We've gotten our GPU ninjas to go under the hood and optimize and squeeze every little bit of performance out of it for GPU architectures, and then we release them to the public for free. And so this is the way to consume the software that we write. So coupled with a little bit of knowledge of your algorithm and how many pieces and sections of it can be parallelized and are better suited for a GPU, along with our optimized software packages that we update monthly, this is the best route to consuming this GPU. So I hope this gives a little bit of an overview of the hardware that NVIDIA provides, the software that NVIDIA provides, and what accelerated computing can mean for speeding up and improving and optimizing your scientific workflow. Thank you.